Something I get asked all the time is, what do I need to do to get the most out of my electronics? How do I need to set them up? I want to go through a few of the menu options that I adjust that helps me really be able to see bass all across the country in a lot of different scenarios. When you're out there on the water and you're using your electronics, it really is money well spent, time well spent to sit down and take a few minutes when you first put your boat in the water, if you've not been out there, or if it's a new body of water, to go through some of those menu options and just make sure you've got that unit doing everything that it possibly can. For me, I run Humminbird. These are Helix 12 Mega Gen 3 units. A lot of this stuff is going to be the same way in any brand graph that you decide to run. Some of the different things may be named different, but they actually kind of do the same thing. I wanted to pull in here, get in the shade where you could really see this screen well, and go through a few of the menu options that I adjust that helps me really be able to see all across the country in a lot of different scenarios. So looking at side imaging picture here, there's a few things that I'm going to adjust. For this unit on the body of water that I'm fishing right now, my sensitivity at 14 is working really well. Thankfully here where I'm at, there's not a lot of cover. These fish are on pretty bare bottom, so they show up really well. But if you're fishing a place, those fish are in rock, those fish are in wood, you've really got to have that stuff set up perfectly to show up every little detail, every shadow, every white dot that you can possibly see to pick them out of that cover. That's why you got to find that sweet spot, typically somewhere in that 8 to 15 range with your sensitivity. If you drop down to the enhanced menu, my contrast is set at 8, which is a little bit below the midpoint of 20. Contrast is a really important thing that can really help distinguish stuff off of the bottom, especially fish and brush piles. You can really separate well with that contrast. And then sharpness is off, contour mode is off. I always leave those two off anymore. And then a couple things that are things that I leave the same regardless of where I go. One is the range. I always run it on a 100-foot range. For me, that allows me to have the same slate regardless of where I'm at. If I'm in 10 feet of water or if I'm in 50 feet of water, I know what stuff looks like on a 100-foot range. I know what a school of white bass looks like. I know what a school of largemouth look like. I can pick out those differences in them because I'm so used to looking at stuff on a 100-foot range. The speed, I always run it on speed of 6, so that's the chart speed of how fast it updates from the top and moves down. For the speed that I idle, which is basically motor in gear, foot off the throttle, about 3.5 to 4 miles an hour, match that up with the chart speed of 6, I know how big it's going to draw a fish. I know how big that they're going to look. And then the final part of that is the color palette. I like color number 4 the best. Brown is what I've used the most. That's what I have my sensitivity and my contrast set for. I've spent a lot of time looking at this screen with a 100-foot range, moving at a chart speed of 6 on that color number 4 palette, so I know how stuff looks. Those are things that you need to keep consistent, because what that will do, regardless of where you go, you're going to know just how big stuff is because your range is the same. You're going to know how stuff looks on the speed because your speed of the chart is the same, and then you're running the same color palette for that screen. Those 3 things are things that I never ever vary from, and it's because once I get used to this unit, everything is going to show up the same, whether I'm in Tennessee, I'm in Florida, or I'm in New York. Those are things that never ever change regardless of the fishery that I go to. With side imaging, some people, if you're new to it or just don't understand the technology a little bit, understanding where stuff is that you see on the screen in relation to where you're actually at in the world is really important. You see fish on side imaging, but going back to actually put your bait on them is definitely something else that you got to learn. But to really understand well, go buy something very obvious. A bridge pier that's on almost any body of water, but the lake we're on actually has silos in it. So I can see right as I start picking that up, that's when I started seeing that silo on the screen. And you can see kind of that semicircle shape of it. That's because I can't see the back side of it. I can only see this front side. And then that black shadow that extends all the way off the screen, that's because that silo goes all the way above the surface of the water. So that's why that black shadow goes all the way off. The other stuff down there on the bottom part of the screen, those are actually pieces of concrete. That's part of the foundation of that barn that was there years and years ago to go with the silo, so that you've got a big foundation there as well as that silo. But that gives you a really good visual. So that just helps give you an understanding of where that is when you're seeing it. That's definitely those fish sitting just out here on that 360. On the side imaging, what I've got on the back of the boat, it's looking perpendicular to either side all the time. 360 is doing just that. It's making a 360-degree sweep all around the boat, every direction. So the way I have my 360 set up, I'm running a 100-foot range. So from the center to the outside is 100 foot any direction. And then there's rings. There's 25, 50, 75, and then that 100-foot ring. That just gives me some reference to know just how far away I am from those fish at all times. A lot of times what I've realized is just how far I cast. You know, with a deep diving crankbait, I'll make 150, maybe 175-foot cast at times. So I may be catching fish that I can't quite even see with that 100-foot screen, but more times than not, they'll end up being between that 75 and 100-foot screen, 100-foot rings on my screen is where I end up catching most of them. That 360 really is the tool that once I drop the trolling motor and I'm trying to catch them, that's what I look at to make sure that I make a pinpoint cast. You can have these great graphs on your boat, but until you get out there, you spend that time in those units to really get them dialed in, that's when you're going to get that return. So, man, I encourage you, if you've got these units already, any type of good electronics, if you're wanting to get more out of them, put the rod and reel down, put the motor in gear, turn your graphs on, and just start riding around and looking. That's really what it takes, is a lot of time sitting in this driver's seat, staring at those screens. You got to put your time in on those electronics. That's the only way it'll ever happen.